Setting up, redirecting, go.
And I see it live on YouTube already.
Setting up. Great. I guess we're here together for this final briefing of campus climate.
I see it live on YouTube already. I see it live.
Setting up. Great. I guess we're here together for this final briefing of campus feedback.
Okay, I think we can get started.
We can. It's just the three of us this evening. Rock has traveled back to the United States to be with family for Thanksgiving. So we wish him a happy holiday back there. While the three of us are still here in Baku, anxiously anticipating the conclusion of this year's UN climate change negotiations. And it's been an interesting couple of weeks, I would say, as far as how these proceedings have moved ahead. It's not been our traditional UN climate conference, in my opinion. We've had prior conferences that emphasized loss and damage, but we've never had one that seemed to exclusively deal with loss and damage and financing for less developed countries, climate mitigation and renewable energy investment. So I would like to hear from Michael and Matthew to get us started on this fundamental aspect of the tone and content and emphasis of this year's UN Climate Conference. Matthew, what do you have on that topic? What's your perspective on this, even though this is your first COP?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, this is my first COP, so I have a very new perspective to all of this. Um, there, the emphasis on finance has been interesting. Um, it's there's that old saying that there's no mission without margin. So finance is obviously essential when it comes to climate action. Someone's got to pay for the technologies and for the adaptation and stuff. So it's not misplaced to money so much. But what stuck out to me about this COP, it seems there's been a little bit of a divide between like the negotiators and kind of the everyone else that's here, and that a lot of people on the ground, a lot of scientists and activists I've spoken with have been very focused on preventative measures, like what can we do to actually stop climate change? What technologies can we work on to take carbon out of the atmosphere? That sort of stuff. And a lot of activists focusing on, well, we need to divest from fossil fuels. We need to move away from all of the stuff that's killing the earth. Whereas the negotiators and the people on top seem to just be focusing on, well, all this bad stuff already happened. Let's just try to rebuild a bit and see what happens. And so, in terms of the finance talks that have been going on these past 2 weeks, they have been frustratingly backward focused. They've not been looking at what can we do to solve this problem? What can we do to prevent further damage? They've been very focused on, well, damage is already occurred. So what can we do to make it? Which is not exactly the sort of talks we want to see. It's not been progressive planning, and not in any significant way, at least. It's all been, like I said, very backwards facing. So it doesn't seem like this COP was even intended to try and solve the climate crisis at all, but just to respond to crises that have already occurred. Um, so that's not exactly what you would want to see out of a climate change conference. And it's been made worse by the fact that as simplistic and not progressive as the solutions that have been talked about have been, there still hasn't been any agreements reached. there's still been so much disagreement between countries, so much infighting and politicization of the issues. Um, it kind of doubles down the uh, you know, I don't want to say uselessness of these talks, but it doubles down on how ineffective the negotiations have been. So it's been frustrating to see, to say the very least. And so finance is important, and that can't be denied. But finance needs to focus on actually solving the issue, um, and I haven't really done that these past 2 weeks.
You said backward facing. Speaking of backgrounds and backward facing, what's where? Tell us where you are.
Yes, no. So I am right on the Caspian Sea. So if you can see the ocean, or not the ocean, sea right there. It's very dark. But right behind me, those three pillars there are the flame towers. So something like skyscrapers here in like downtown, if you will, Baku. And then behind me is an old oil rig, where John was in front of a couple of days ago.
Now, those flame
That's
towers,
where I'm.
the flame towers is that an allusion to gas flares?
You know, it might be. That's just what I saw them called on Google Maps.
Uh,
But
uh,
certainly a thematic thing to have in the background as they display some patriotic imagery. They've had some national animals and their flags and stuff displayed in lights there, which have been interesting to see.
So both last year and this year, the COP has been held in cities that oil and gas built. Um, they have Dubai was extremely shiny new city, very well developed, very highly developed. Baku is sort of a mixture of the old traditional Soviet community city and the modern. Have you had a chance to spend any time downtown the past couple of days, and what were your impressions of that?
Yeah, I've definitely seen a mix, like you said, of some very, very old style architecture and some very modern stuff. And I mean, you can even see that from where I am right now. I'm just and then in the background are these three super high-tech skyscrapers that are covered in light displays that show like moving patterns. And so it's a very interesting mix of like you said, the old style Soviet stuff and the new. And I did get to spend some time in the old town the other day, which is just gorgeous. Um, just some beautiful old architecture, and I even got to visit an old the Palace of the Shirvanshah, which is a very old style Islamic architecture, which is just incredible to see. And then you see, you know, the very, very modern. I mean, more looking almost more developed than some cities in the U.S. with these just light, you know, skyscrapers covered in lights in these really unique shapes and patterns. It's you know incredible what you can pay for when you're funded by burning the earth.
Well, I looked at the numbers and ran them because folks accuse Azerbaijan as being a petro state. But when you take its total oil and gas, its total energy production, and, and you divide it by the number of people in the country, and then you do the same thing for the USA, and then you adjust for the percent of renewable energy in each country. Looking back over the past, dozen or more years of COP, the UAE was by far the most extreme petro state, and Azerbaijan is second, but it's comparable to the US on a per capita basis as far as fossil fuel production. So, we might like to point the finger at a nation like Azerbaijan, but in all actuality, they are no more perpetrator of fossil fuels than we are. The towers are now in flames behind you, so that's a very interesting
Yes,
effect.
they are.
And just a moment ago, they were emblazoned with the COP29 acronym and other messaging on that. So a very striking image, and thank you for joining us from downtown there. One other thing, you as a young
Yeah,
person,
absolutely.
walking with you, I noticed the attention that you drew from many other young people. Not so much the folks. They've seen it all from the young people, so they just glance at you and move on. But you're definitely an outlier here with the blonde hair and the shagginess of it. So have you had a chance to talk with many young people there in Baku? And if not, do you think you might be able to before you jump on that airplane?
Yeah, so on Sunday, which was like the day of rest for the conference, I got to do most of my exploring then, and I saw quite a few young people there. And actually, I got a little bit lost on the metro one time, and there was a group of young guys around my age who were like, "Yo, you're lost. We can tell," and they were super helpful. They showed me like exactly where I needed to go and stuff, and they were just so nice, so welcoming, and I found it very funny. They were on their way to take an English exam, and so they were just practicing their English with me, which was really fun. Um,
That's
and I
interesting.
actually had a really neat experience today. Just earlier today, I was getting on the metro to leave the conference and go back to our apartment. And I ran into a volunteer staff member, and it was the very same one that I actually checked into the conference with on the first day. The exact same person. So I got to see the same staff member on the first and last day of the conference, and that was really cool. We exchange some stories and stuff. That was really neat. And then so I've exchanged quite a few LinkedIn's, quite a few Instagrams. And then actually earlier tonight, in the middle of the Democrats Zoom we did earlier, Michael's pictures actually saved me because as soon as his pictures came on, there was a group of guys that came up to me and started talking. And so I kind of just plugged out of the meeting for a little bit and chatted with them while the pictures were going. And it was really interesting to hear their perspectives on everything, to get to hear them talk about how, the conference has affected them, hear their thoughts on the US and stuff. And there's of course a little bit of a language here. I'm a silly American who only knows one language. But we communicated as best we could, and it was a really wonderful experience. I haven't spoken to anyone everyone I've spoken to that's been around my age has been really nice and really interested in hearing about my experiences and what I think about the city. And it's been really wonderful to see the people here.
Yeah, I noticed that they take pride. When I was there last night, and just about where you are, I had a group of about five kids, boys from 11 to
Mhm.
15, gathering around me, chatting me up, and they wanted to know what I thought of Baku and Azerbaijan.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
When you say nice things about it, they light up with pride. They're just so happy about their city and hosting this event. So going from you as a first-time attendee of COP and offering your perspectives on the tone and content of this one, we'll switch over to while I may have the whitest hair in the group, Michael has the most number of COPs under his belt. I think 9 since Paris. So, Michael, what's your perspective on the tone of this year's event as compared to others, and where you might hope we'd be by the 29th year of this event?
Uh, there are so many things I would like to say that I don't even know where to start, because as you were chatting with Matt, I just wanted to step in few times and say, "Oh, you are so wrong," but I was polite and I I just kept quiet. But let's go step by step. So you were talking first about the finances, and as I was preparing for this meeting tonight, I was just Googling around and reading some news. And here is, let me quote from the article. I believe it's on Reuters, I believe. Please let me type. Let me just read it what it says. The 2-week conference, due to end on Friday evening, Spilt Pass is scheduled close, and with the expectations of 250 billion target could yet rise. Now, this is 250 billion, and the developing countries were talking about 1.3 trillion dollars. So the perspective from both sides. So here is just a quote from a special representative for Panama. I am so mad. It's ridiculous. It's just so ridiculous. It feels that the developed world wants the planet to burn. And now the European negotiator, meanwhile, says no one is comfortable with the number because it's so high. So this is what it says. This is how the COP really works out. The developing countries want the money, and for them, whatever will be agreed will be too low. The developed world says, "Oh, it's way too high. We cannot provide that." And that's what this whole COP was around. I mean, there were so many interesting things to see and experience here and there, but the outcome is just this one figure: how high will be the amount of money which the developing world wants from the developed world. That's point one. Then you were talking about the flame towers so nicely. So I actually walked around there today. I took some images which I will share a little later, but I Googled it because I was so curious about the flame towers. So let me just read few facts that I read about the flame towers. So it's 3 skyscrapers, as you can see in the background, but it's owned by offshore companies linked to the ruling family of the president Aliyev. So it's basically a family business there. That's one thing. It cost about $500 million to build it in a country which doesn't really produce that much, doesn't have the GDP is not that high. That's one interesting fact about the flame tower. The other one is that it's really completely covered by the LCD screens. There is more than 10,000 of them, and they are shining all night long, every single night. But that's not the most interesting fact. The one I really like the most is that it basically says the flame towers are something of a Potemkin village, in the fact that the towers, one of the tower houses a luxury hotel, and the other two are basically empty. They are not used. One is a luxury hotel, the other two are empty. So I was just curious what's happening in that one luxury hotel. So I Googled it, went online. I wanted to book it for tonight. The cheapest room I found was $600, and the average is about $1,500 a night. That's pretty steep in a country where the income is way below these figures. So that would be related to the flame towers that you were talking so nicely about them. That's exactly what you expect from a Potemkin village. And well, I have a few more points, but let's not be too critical. So back to you.
Well, that comment from Panama is a very interesting one, to say that developing nations want the planet to burn. It would almost seem that everyone engaged in this conversation as far as loss and damage, simply by distracting themselves from addressing the fundamental causes of climate change and taking measures to get that under control. Recovery and assistance to the victims are a great thing once you've won a war. Once you overcome the adversary. The United States after World War II spent an awful lot of money helping the adversary nations in Germany and Japan after the war, but we didn't do it during the war. What we had sent to those countries during the war was a little bit different. We had different priorities during the war, but once victory was secured, then we focused on helping everyone recover from that tragedy of many years. And I fear that the oil companies in particular just love the fact that we're talking about this, that we're not focused on them. We're focused on rich versus poor nations. We're not focused on the corporations and the fossil fuel industries at the core of this issue. And our overall consumption of fossil fuel and consumption of everything in this world. Our use of fossil fuels is simply a byproduct of our desire for more and more stuff, higher standards of living. So by fueling this standard of living acceleration in one form or another, we're actually contributing to the climate crisis. So it's an important discussion to be had, but I'm not sure it should be allowed to overwhelm the primary objective of this, which is to make sure that all of us, all nations, get on the other side of this climate crisis in one piece and able to continue this thing we call human civilization. And we're a long way from achieving that goal right now. So this might be a good time, Michael, to go into your slide set, your photographs for the day.
Okay, well, let me share my screen then and show you some of the images taken today. This would be the first image of the day taken at COP. I went to some of the meeting rooms, and that's how it looked like. It was completely empty, or there were a few people sitting here and there. And when I look on the screen with the program for the day, there was almost no program at all. There was something at 3 p.m. in the main plenary, and there were a few news press conferences. But in the meeting rooms, it was just plain empty. There were many people taking their souvenir images, so to prove the world that they were at COP and they have the image with the COP29 sides. Of course, our group has the same image, but we have shared that previously. Then, because the plenaries were empty and the meeting rooms were empty, I walked towards the pavilions, and when I stepped in, right next to the entrance, there is the cryosphere pavilion. And there was some presentation there, so I thought, okay, this is not over yet, and I walked around. But to be honest, the cryosphere pavilion had some program, and the Russian pavilion had some program. That was about it. The Russian pavilion was about Moscow as the city of future, and that was the only two sessions I have seen today, because the rest of the pavilions look like kind of this. So this would be the Thai pavilion, where they were already putting it down. They had some karaoke or traditional Thai music being played there on the huge screen. Some of the pavilions were closed just like this. You could not even enter. This would be the Saiga antelope from Kazakhstan, and it was also disassembled already. Yet another example of the very same thing. So I walked to the Japanese pavilion as my last hope, and when you see that the Japanese are already dismantling their pavilion, then you know COP29 or this COP is over. But it was just so much fun to watch the Japanese people, how efficient and precise there was. It was one of the highlights of the day, just watching them how they do, when they do something, they do it really well. So that was about my experience at COP today, but it was still not that late in the afternoon, so I decided to go and see the city because we've been to we visited the old town, but I wanted to see a little bit more as well. Now, as you mentioned earlier, it's very difficult to take an image in Baku without the Soviet block of flats. They appear basically in every image. You just cannot take an image without a Soviet block of flats there. So this is one of the huge blocks of flats very close to the center, and the people on the left-hand side, they were actually putting some salt there. So one of the monuments would be very green. The monument I'm talking about is this building. It's called the Heydar Aliyev Monument or Heydar Aliyev Center. And just I was also curious exactly what that, so I Google it, and let me just read what it says on their website. The center shall conduct consistent activities in the field of research and broad promotion of the nation building philosophy and Azerbaijanism ideology of Heydar Aliyev. So that's basically the father of the current president, Ilham Aliyev. So the family of Aliyev has been running this nation for about 30 years. So the son, the current president, had this nice, very interesting building built for his father as a reminder of the Azerbaijanism. So North Korea should find some inspiration here as well. The building is really very interesting. It's very futuristic. Of course, there are many police officers around there just making sure that something doesn't go wrong. I just put my backpack on one of the walls for a few seconds because I want to take off my camera and also put on a sweater because it was so windy. And he was there, the police officer was there immediately just asking me what I was doing. How do I dare to put my backpack on this block of concrete? That's not something I should be doing. But again, the building is really futuristic. It's unusual. It's visually very pleasing, and I took some images there. And if I did not know that it's just another sort of a Potemkin's village, I would think that it's fantastic. And as we talked earlier in the program about the flame towers, I also decided to make my way towards the flame towers. So that's how they look like from the bottom. And you can, if you don't want to walk up the hill, you can take a funicular. I mean, the hill is what, 70 meters tall, high, not really more, but you can take a funicular, or you can just simply walk. So I just walk and in order to take more images on the way up there. There is a small mosque right underneath the flame towers, but it doesn't really have much history. It's probably 25 years old, just to show that the nation has also some Islamic history. But as you walk up, then I ended up on one of the viewing platforms from where you can see half of the city. And it's nice. I have to admit, the view is very nice. Although that most of what you can see are just the Soviet blocks of flats. But on the other side, you can see the Caspian Sea, and the view is it is nice. So here is yet another image of the flame towers, and I just wanted to say the fun fact about the LCD panels, but I already said that a few minutes ago. But again, it's 10,000 LCD displays all over the three towers. And the view is really nice, so I just stood there for maybe 20 minutes just taking images this way and the other way. This would be a view from the flame towers towards the area where actually Matthew is located right now. He's somewhere in the middle on the shores of the Caspian Sea. He is located somewhere over here at this very moment. Yet another look towards the Caspian Sea. You can see the huge pylon with the Azerbaijan flag. It seems to be a tradition in the post-Soviet republics. Each of them is trying to have the higher flag, the better. This one is over 100 meters tall, so that should give you an idea how the money is being spent here and in other post-Soviet republics. So what I think it's the last image from the view from the platform, where on the left-hand side you see the city, and towards the right there is the Caspian Sea. Just behind the flame towers, there is also the Azerbaijani TV tower, very high building. It just looks nice. It would be very nice to get a chance to get on top of this building and get a view from up there. There is also the eternal flame monument. I'll get to that in a minute. But again, as you can see on the right hand side, even the eternal flame was just being watched by the police officers to make sure that you watch the proper way, that you don't do something what is not appropriate. Yeah, the eternal flame is right next to this grave memorial, or they call it the Alley of Martyrs. So here are the graves of early martyrs of the Karabakh conflict, and also some victims of the violent crackdown during the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1990. It is also watched by the policemen, obviously, like almost everything in Azerbaijan. But it has some atmosphere. I enjoyed being there, and had some time on reflections as well. Then I walked towards the little mosque, but I believe it's from 1992, so really just 30 years old. I did not even bother walking in because it's located right underneath the flame tower. As I walked back towards the metro from the flame towers, because it became so windy, actually Baku is called the city of wind as well. So it was so windy. I just walked through this little park and take few of the autumn coming images. And I believe this is the last image of the day, because Baku is called the city of wind and Azerbaijan is called the city, the country of fire. And personally, I just don't think that Azerbaijan was the greatest choice for COP, because of the fire and all the fossil fuels and gas which is being produced here. But we talked about that a little bit earlier. So this is the last image of the day, and I'm turning it back to you.
Thank you, Mike. We all always enjoy your photographs of the conference, as well as the nation and the city in which the conference is held. You talked about choices for the location of the UN Climate Conference. I understand that there's a debate going on now. We all know that COP30 is going to be in Brazil, in a northern city of that nation. But the choice for 2026 COP31 seems to be contentious, with Turkey and Australia vying for the bid. To me, I think it's a pretty easy choice. I guess I would lean toward Istanbul, and I would do that for a number of reasons. One, I think we all fly through Istanbul anyway. And I attended Paris. I flew through Istanbul. I've flown to so many of these, and I always wind up going through Istanbul one way or another. So as far as airfare and minimizing the carbon footprint, as far as the airline miles, my guess is that Istanbul would probably be have an advantage there. Then, Matthew, and you saw how big an issue finding affordable housing at these conferences. A lot of these diplomats, they come here with big budgets. These NGOs come here with big budgets. And meanwhile, we're trying to scrounge together a couple of quarters and see if we can possibly pay for the event. We never know if we're actually coming to this thing until like a week before, when we assemble enough funds for the airfare, and then we show up and hope that we have housing that we can afford, and sometimes we don't. So, Istanbul has a lot of hotels, a lot of housing, plus we know a lot of people there. The former Turkish interns have helped us find housing in a number of other COP locations, including this one. So I imagine they'll take pretty good care of us if we wind up in Istanbul in a couple of years. Another good reason is I've seen Istanbul a couple of times, so there wouldn't be any tourism distractions. I've been there, done that, so able to focus on the conference. And then lastly, and most importantly, when I went to Istanbul the first time after the Paris conference in 2015, to see a city of 20 million people all struggling to elevate their standards of living, really, and looking out upon the waters there surrounding Istanbul, and hundreds of large tankers and freighters all lined up to unload or load various consumer goods and products, really underscores the magnitude of the challenge of grappling with an issue that's really fundamentally one of aspirations for standards of living and consumption, energy consumption, driving the improvement of standards of living for people all over the world. When you see that many people engaged in that pursuit, you really have a much more accurate perception of how great an undertaking it really is that's being addressed here at these UN climate conferences. And then I also heard that in the site selection and some of the other conversations, they're talking about a Rule 16. Have you heard about this, Rule 16? it's apparently some sort of measure the negotiators can implement and basically call a timeout and suspend the negotiations. And when I heard Rule 16, it sort of reminded me of that movie Catch 22. And if any of you recall, Catch 22 is a story of somebody trying to get out of the army by pleading insanity and applying for, I guess they call it a Section 8, and the commanding officers respond that saying, well, if you apply to get out of the military on the basis of insanity, the mere fact of making that application means that you're sane, and therefore we can't grant the waiver, the exclusion, and they call that Catch 22. So it seems like a lot of what we're engaged here in at these COPs has a similar sense of absurdity and futility to it. And I think that a city like Istanbul really drives that point home. What are your thoughts, Matthew and Michael, on this discussion of the next location? Not that the location is all that important, it's the content of these events. How do you think maybe even the site selection might affect the tone of the conference and the content of the negotiations?
Well, there is obviously a point in selecting the location. My understanding is that every year the COP has to happen in a different continent. So one year it was Europe, the next year it's Africa, then the next year it's North America, and so on. This year, this past COP, or that we just experienced, was originally planned for maybe Romania, maybe for Bulgaria, maybe for the Czech Republic, so somewhere within the EU. And then Russia simply stepped in and said, no, they have the veto, and a different location had to be agreed on. So that's how it actually ended up in Baku. If I could choose, obviously I would choose Australia. I would definitely prefer Australia. So there would be some also the tourism distraction. My recommendation to you, John, is just don't fly with the Turkish Airways all the time. Of course, you end up through Istanbul. I don't fly Turkish Airlines. I fly with Pegasus, the low-cost Turkish airline, but I will fly through Istanbul as well. But I believe that we will not know for another year. Brazil is that's clear that it has been planned for about 2 or 2.5 years. That's for sure. Brazil is on next. But in my opinion, we will not know for another year, just as it was with Baku. We learned about it at the end of COP28 of this location. It was actually the very last day of COP28 when Baku was finally announced. And my guess is it might be very similar with the COP, which will happen 2 years from now. We might just learn about the location only once we will be in Brazil.
Matthew, any thoughts on this
Yeah.
all important debate?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know too much about Turkey or Australia as nations. I do know that I hear a lot on the internet about the scary animals that are in Australia, so maybe I want to stay away from those. Um, but I do know that Australia is also some has some pretty deep ties with fossil fuels as well. Perhaps not as deep as the U.S. or some other countries do. Um, Honestly, I can't really give an intelligent answer on this. I don't really know too much about either of those countries. But like you said, John, I'm gonna fly through Turkey anyways. Probably, I flew through it to get here, so at a minimum, it'll make it easier to pull the funds for the airfare. Um, but yeah, definitely some interesting choices, and certainly something I should read up more on, because I think the fact that I can't really give a response to this, I should probably go and learn more about these countries that are on the table, and probably learn some more about Brazil as well, given that it's going to happen there next year. It's interesting to see how, Michael, I'm really glad you mentioned the how the decision was made to host it here, because it's so interesting to see how just geopolitics plays into the choice of these locations. So it's from the get-go, you know, it's not just a decision of, well, what's going to be the best place to host this, what's going to, you know, have the least ties to pollution and stuff like that. It's a very political decision of where it's hosted, to the point where, you know, Russia's decision to say like, no, it can't be anywhere in the EU. There's definitely some not climate related factors motivating the to make the choice. So it's really interesting to see how not climate related politics go into the climate conference decisions, which is not always encouraging to hear, but certainly something for me to research about once I'm back home.
Well, but getting back to, you know, the negotiations that you're trying to conclude, it's my understanding that the Loss and Damage and Financing Fund was established back in 2009 and sought to reach a level of about $100 billion a year, and now, you know, they're talking about 250 billion a year by 2035, with some conversations about aspiring to, you know, 5 times that level, 4 times that level, 1.3 trillion by that time. And you know, we just had the U.S. elections, and a lot of the elections, some of the issues being exploited in the campaign were the diversion of U.S. monies towards migrants rather than going to FEMA for emergency relief from the hurricanes that affected Florida and Georgia and North Carolina specifically. And I hardly think that the United States next administration is going to be very sympathetic to sending much more money overseas for something like this. So in many ways, I would think that the U.S. negotiators present at COP29 really have very little in the way of legitimacy. It's a lame duck administration, and it's hard to see that anything that they could agree to would have any staying power in U.S. politics and funding. So, you know, that's an interesting perspective. And then, you know, a lot of this financing is about helping less developed countries develop using renewable energies rather than the fossil fuel energies. But, you know, in all reality, it's likely that any funding sent there on that would simply be in parallel. They're going to develop as best they can with the most economical energies available. So it seems to me that the more developed countries still have a lot of work to do to really drive down the costs of the truly renewable energies, and make sure that they are the absolute rock bottom cheapest option for anyone to develop. Once you achieve that, the financing sort of takes care of itself, because all of the development money is going to naturally go to that lowest cost provider of energy. So I think that, you know, the best, most productive use of the rich economies is to really drive that technology forward, and to drive it through the economies of scale. So once it's implemented at large scales in developed countries, the cost per unit comes down, as China has demonstrated it can deliver on solar panel technology. By their sheer volume, they've driven that down, despite the fact that it's been on the backs of coal power plants to a large extent. So I think there's a lot more work that we need to do on the technology front to really have these negotiations matter, and to have the loss and damage funds and the finance funds really deliver the greatest bang for the buck towards addressing the climate crisis. Any additional comments from you, Michael, or Matthew, on any of the topics or any of your experiences here at COP29?
Oh, you just wrapped it up so well, John, that at this point I don't really know what else to add, because you just wrapped it up.
Well, you know, it's so nice to have a compliment from Michael, you know, on my words, because whenever I take a photograph, It's quite the opposite. I'm definitely put in my place as far as areas of expertise or lack thereof. Uh, so
Oh. Well, I
Matthew,
believe that that credit is deserved where it's deserved, and pointing out few
as well.
huge mistakes you make in photography, I'll just try to avoid them.
I appreciate that. I
I
appreciate
mean,
that.
let's just end up from my side with the compliment I just gave you.
Thank you. Thank you. Matthew, any additional comments? You're the star of
Yeah.
this. You realize that this is Campus Climate Corps. This is about university students. This is about you and your perspective and communicating it back to your peers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm before anything else, I always want to say I'm so grateful to even be here. And you and so many other people have been instrumental in, getting me halfway around the world. So it's been just wonderful to be here and to experience this conference. Um, and so there's been so many goods, so many highs, like I talked about earlier, just so many wonderful people that are here in Baku. But a lot of lows as well, witnessing the negotiations and how slow they go. And I remember one day I went into a negotiation and I passed a demonstration on the way there where people were chanting like climate finance now. And then I go into a negotiation for it was about the GCF, the Green Climate Fund. And there was, 10 minutes spent on one paragraph, and then they couldn't even come to a conclusion there, so they just left it incomplete and moved on. And I was like, well, that's the state of climate finance now is, 10 minutes on one sentence. So there are so many different perspectives here. And it's a lot of mixed emotions walking away from the conference. I think that the biggest takeaway is that we need more action than just these conferences. We've had 29 years of them, and the crisis isn't solved yet. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done outside of here, in between the conferences, in between these big gatherings. There's so much that needs to be done, especially in the realm of technology and politics. And so there's a lot to be done, and we have to be the ones to do it. And this thing that the campus climate corps, I think that university students are like myself, we're very uniquely positioned to actually take that action. um, and it's a privilege that we're able to do that, but it's a privilege we need to use. um,
Speaking
so
of
yeah.
using it, have you given any thought? I don't want to put you on the spot, but have you given any thought how you use this experience in the coming year and bringing it into your climate activism?
Yeah, absolutely. In the coming week, I'm going to use this experience to make probably 3 or 4 presentations to make up some credit for the classes I missed. So that's going to be the first way I use it. But there's some wonderful climate action going on at the University of Florida campus, especially through Sunrise Movement and Gen Clio, but not limited to that. And so I definitely have some coordination to do there to talk to some people who are much more experienced climate activists than myself and be like, hey, this is this cool experience I just had. Here's everything I learned. Tell me what you want to know. Tell me how you and your people can benefit from this. Um, and so
What
that's going to be the
what
main focus.
what about you've been exposed to a lot of new knowledge here. Have there been anything
Mhm.
that have poked you and said, I need to learn more about this, or I need to learn more about that? Are there any areas that sort of piqued your interest in pursuing new information and new knowledge outside of this conference?
Yeah, I mean, something that you said to me pretty early on here at the conference. You showed me that chart of the price of solar energy and how it's just gone down, down, down over the years, just becoming more and more affordable, regardless of who's in office. And I think that's pretty symbolic of just how important renewable energy is, not just because because it has lower emissions, but because it's just going to become the best option for energy. It's just going to become the cheapest, most accessible kind of energy. And so that's definitely something I'm very uneducated on and something I really need to learn more about. And in the field of renewables as well, I talked to our friend Sebastian, who's an expert in the nuclear field, and I am very uneducated when it comes to nuclear. I mean, the science goes way over my head, but it was wonderful to talk to him to see his thoughts on how nuclear is probably going to become just as cheap as other forms of energy are now. Of course, it has large upfront effects, but as gas prices are likely to go up in the coming years, to things like nuclear are probably going to become much like solar, just plain and simple the best option. And so I need to learn more about those, and I need to learn how I can kind of bring those to places. I need to learn how, if I'm probably not going to go into developing solar technology, but I very well might, work on getting solar installed in more places. I mean, I'm taking a sustainability class in school right now, and our final project for that class is just doing some sort of sustainable project around campus. And so, um, we could get more solar at UF. I don't know. Who knows? But there's so much about renewable energies that I don't know. And so I need to learn that, and I need to learn especially about how it can be applied in more places. I've definitely, I think it's hard to narrow down, other than just to those things, what exactly it is I'm walking away wanting to learn more about. Because the best answer I can give, aside from, oh, let me just like do a bunch of Googling about solar and nuclear, the biggest thing I learned was just how little I know. There's so much going on in this field. Um, and it's been wonderful. It's honestly been wonderful to see how little I know, because I thought that I was pretty decently well educated when it comes to climate, but there's so much I need to learn about how global geopolitics goes into it, how finance goes into it. And you talked on one of the other calls about how proper accounting is necessary for real climate action. There's so much more than I thought was involved. Um, and so I think what I need to do is I'm gonna get home and I'm gonna read through all the extensive notes I took and been like, all right, what the heck did I just witness, and how can I translate this into a plan to learn more about it as the weeks go by.
When you're dealing with any number of topics, whether it's solar, nuclear, wind, carbon sequestration, regenerative agriculture, all of these, the common denominator are the numbers and the accounting and what we call ecological economics. The economics, but with the right goals and metrics employed. So if I had to recommend anything to young people, it's to get an appreciation for ecological economics. I'm not an ecological economist. I've played one in some projects, but it really provides a fundamental foundation for evaluating just about anything and making sure it's not greenwashing, making sure it's a legitimate contribution to addressing the climate crisis without deception and with efficiency. And it can also point in the direction of increasing standards of living. So it can help optimize all of the outcomes, all the values that we establish in pursuing climate solutions. So, that's an important thing to keep in mind. And it's also important that regardless of what you choose, that you do it with intensity. And I say that to all the students out there. We've had prior students. Michael set up and managed an office in Tajikistan, in Dushanbe, and one of the students that he recruited and managed there is now actually a lead negotiator and representative for the Green Climate Fund. He's from Tajikistan, but based in South Korea now. So a lot of the experiences that you develop here can help point you in directions and shape your career. And we want to do that for students like you and the students listening. So we encourage them to reach out to us and engage us in projects with their university. We can do these broadcasts in cooperation with universities, just like we did with Florida Gulf Coast University this year, just as we've done with the University of Florida in prior years. We need every campus engaged in this issue and bringing to bear all the talent that's embodied in the thousands and millions of university students out there. So thank you, Matthew, for participating, making time, taking time out of your classes to be here and help cover this and help communicate it back to your peers back in the United States. And then, of course, Michael, the images that you provide are one of the most effective communication mechanisms. So, Michael, any closing comments until Brazil next year?
Oh, I already provided you with the credit. So let's not push it.
Okay.
I want to say that I enjoyed being here with Matthew. I was very nicely surprised how productive and efficient he was. So Matthew, good job. And I gave John the credit already. So let me stop. Here. So my last word is see you at COP30 in Brazil. I guess that would be my last word. So see you there.
Okay. And you, Matthew?
Well, thank you, Michael. I do really appreciate that. It's been really wonderful to meet all of you. I was scared, to fly alone and to spend 2 weeks halfway around the world, but this has been a wonderful experience, and I'm really glad that I met all of you. I couldn't have asked for a better trip to Azerbaijan.
Well, we're missing Rock here, who's back in the States. We've got to thank Rock for making this possible as well. He's been at this since 2015, since he was 18 years old, and none of this would be possible without his continuing efforts as an undergraduate and graduate student. So we look forward to convening the team, a larger team next year, with more events, with more young people around the United States and around the world. So until next year, from Campus Climate Corps, thank you for watching, and get in touch with us and see what we can do about this issue. Good night. Good afternoon.